So today I want to talk about how to build national championship programs and how recruiting nationally is the only way to do that now. And all that's coming up after the bumper.
Don't be cornering me. Hold up. Time. You gotta help me with that corner shit.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always college football related, sports related. We have a good time. Today, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about recruiting nationally and how that has become just what you do. And I feel like because we have such short memories about college football, especially those of us that haven't been around for a very long time, that we forget that you have to recruit nationally to win national championships. I have always thought, though, you need to have a strong backbone of your in-state talent to bolster that roster. And I butt up against people on this proposition, but I can't argue with the numbers here because Oklahoma is not the kind of place that is going to produce 20 blue chip recruits each year. They're just not going to do it. We're lucky if we get 5 4-stars in 1 year, let alone a 5-star. And even then, that player no longer is just one that Oklahoma or Oklahoma State gets to add. It's not even one that Tulsa gets to look at. It's one that gets booted to Ohio State or Michigan because they can recruit nationally. And the reason you can do that now is quite literally television. When you take a look at what it was back in the day, Notre Dame was really the only national brand because they played a coast-to-coast schedule and because they were so good. Even when Oklahoma was at its height with the 47-game win streaks in the Barry Switzer era, you could still get away with either one, going to get guys straight off of war and getting them into OU, Bud Wilkinson, or going into the state of Texas and routinely coming out with gems in Barry Switzer. And if you had a kid that could play in Oklahoma, because it was really the only team that they watched, you had a better shot at getting them. As a matter of fact, I remember the conversation around Adrian Peterson and how, that was like the last class that you could really recruit regionally and get a bunch of those guys. And I know that because take a look at the 2005 Texas Longhorns team. Now, say what you will about the team, but it won a national championship. And it won a national championship with just 5% of its roster coming from outside the Lone Star State, which really helped us shape up how good the state of Texas is at producing talent. They had 78 guys on that roster that were from the state of Texas, and they destroyed people on their way to winning a national championship that year. It's really the last time that we had seen a team so dominant that was that saturated from players within its state, though LSU got close in 2007. And I know this from taking a look at Chris Hummer's 247 sports article on this, which is pretty good. But that 5.1% is the lowest that it has been in the modern era, I think, and modern era being the recruiting rankings era since about 1999. That 2007 LSU team was 19.5% of its players saw play from outside the state. And then that 2010 Auburn team was 16.8%. But since then, the lowest number has been the 2013 Florida State national champions that had about 21% of its roster come from from outside the state. And then it continues to go up. Matter of fact, with Ohio State, they've really been eating well outside of the state of Ohio with that 2014 national championship team. 39% of it came from outside the state. And we know that Urban Meyer made it a priority to go into places like Florida particularly and bring out recruits, go into Texas later and bring out recruits. And when you look at what they've been able to produce, Chase Young is from Maryland, right? Jeff Okudah is from Texas. J.K. Dobbins is from Texas. You continue to look, Josh Proctor is from Oklahoma, and we'll see what he becomes. I mean, you continue to go on and on with looking at these players. Justin Fields is from Georgia, and you get what I'm talking about here. And for their Oklahoma, that has meant California, that has meant Texas, that has meant Florida. It's meant going wherever you need to go. Virginia, if you can, the D.C. area here of late with guys like Parnell Motley and Joseph Wette, and perhaps even Caleb Williams, who's the number 1 quarterback in this 2021 class. You look at tailbacks, you go to Texas, right? Kennedy Brooks is from there. You go to Georgia to get Trey Sermon. You go to Georgia to get Jaden Hazelwood. Georgia's become a kind of place where you can expect 20 good blue chip recruits each and every year. There's only a few states that get to say that, and yet Georgia gets to recruit nationally, right? They have their hands all over the place because they're on television with CBS and they get the primetime 2:30 game because they've been so good. Knowing that we're in this age where everybody who wants to compete at a national level needs to have two things. They need to have the blue chip ratio, which means at least 55-60% of your roster needs to be 4 stars or better to have a chance to compete at this thing. But you also need to be able to pull kiddos from everywhere. And unless you come from one of those saturated states, your backbone is probably going to come from an adjacent state, right? So Florida is good enough to field not just Miami, Florida State, and Florida, but also Central Florida and FIU and FAU, and on it goes there. Like Texas, it can field so many good college football teams across so many divisions because it's so saturated with talent. Used to be the same thing with California, and as much as it's kind of fallen off a little bit, it's still plenty rich because the University of Oregon can go down to LA and pick off players, man. I mean, they started doing that way back in the Chip Kelly era when Will Lyles would just go down there and get guys for him, among other things, right? And Arizona's coming on in this way as well. I just think about what the state of Arizona would be like if they were able to hang on to some of the talent just in recent years. Like Mark Andrews comes out of Arizona. Spencer Rattler comes out of Arizona. Bijan Robinson, Jake Smith. And those are just guys that are recent coming out of the state of Arizona. And Noah Nelson, right, who's going to be a true freshman in Oklahoma. 6'8", 320-pound offensive tackle. He's from the state of Arizona. I find this to be fascinating because really it's just giving more data to the argument that I don't usually make, which is that if you want to win a national championship, you have to go far and wide to go get players. Again, I still think that number of out-of-state players, though, is still on the downside of your roster. And that's the thing that I really want to hammer home here is, yes, you need to recruit out-of-state and you need to recruit heavily out-of-state. But even on the last 15 years, the team that's won the national championship with the highest percentage of out-of-state players is still just Ohio State at 39%, which means that 60% of the roster comes from the state of Ohio, right? And I think we kind of miss that sometimes. And as college football is becoming more regional and less likely to be nationally spoken about because the conferences have, one, not been as good as the SEC, and two, we don't get to talk about the Pac-12 because the only national brand that people care about is USC. Like, even when Washington was making the college football playoff 4 years ago, we weren't really talking about them as a national brand in the way that we do Texas or Georgia or Alabama or Oklahoma or now Clemson. And Clemson is the extreme version of this, right? With, man, I want to say, what was it? This 2018 team, 37% of its players came from out of conference, and then out of South Carolina, and then 29%, 29.7, so 30% of the roster on that 2016 national championship team came from out of their region when we're talking about recruiting. So I guess I should amend this from state to region being Southeast versus the state of South Carolina, because yes, I should have said that from the jump. I apologize. We're caught up now. So what do you think? Do you think that you should recruit heavily your region, or do you think that you should do what Clemson has done and just go outside of it as much as you possibly can? Because my favorite joke is asking people where Clemson is, and it's in South Carolina, but more than that, it's in Clemson, South Carolina. How many people know that until they start to actually pay attention to college football and recruiting? Not a whole lot. Probably the same number of people who learned that the Tulsa massacre was a thing like yesterday, which is, I'm boiling over this because I was raised with this, but that's something else entirely. All right, deuces.